My sister Delaney looked Commander Valdez dead in the eye and said 3 words that would either save our entire unit or get us all killed. "I volunteer, sir." The silence that followed was deafening. 37 battle-hardened soldiers staring at this 24-year-old private who'd barely been in Afghanistan for 3 months, and she just volunteered for what everyone in that room knew was a suicide mission. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I'm Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, and I've been a combat medic for 6 years. I've seen soldiers make impossible choices, watched heroes emerge from the most unlikely places. But nothing prepared me for the moment my baby sister stepped forward, when every veteran in the room had stayed silent. See, Delaney wasn't supposed to be the hero of this story. Hell, she wasn't supposed to be in the army at all. 3 days earlier, she was just my little sister who painted watercolor landscapes and could barely do 10 push-ups without collapsing. The same girl I'd spent years trying to keep away from anything dangerous. The one our parents called the gentle one, back home in Portland. The one who cried when she accidentally stepped on a spider. But there she stood, facing down Commander Valdez, a man whose reputation for destroying insubordinate soldiers was legendary across the entire brigade. This was a commander who'd once made a sergeant do push-ups until he passed out just for questioning a training schedule. And my sister, all 5'4" of her, had just challenged his entire worldview about who gets to be brave. "Private Chen," Valdez's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You've been at this forward operating base for exactly 93 days. This mission requires someone with extensive communication systems knowledge and the experience to handle enemy contact under extreme pressure." I held my breath. Every person in that briefing room knew what came next. Valdez was about to humiliate her in front of everyone, make an example of what happens when junior enlisted personnel step out of line. I wanted to jump up, pull rank, drag my sister out of there before she destroyed her military career in front of 30 witnesses. But then Delaney did something that changed everything. Instead of backing down or stammering an apology, she straightened her shoulders and said, "Sir, I worked as a radio communications specialist for the Oregon Forest Service for 5 years before I enlisted. I coordinated emergency rescues in terrain more challenging than anything we're facing here. I've guided helicopters through mountain storms with 0 visibility and talked lost hikers through survival situations when their lives depended on my voice staying calm." The room went dead silent again, but this time it was different. This wasn't the silence of shock at insubordination. This was the silence of professional soldiers realizing they might have completely misjudged someone. Commander Valdez tilted his head slightly, studying my sister like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're telling me you have extensive emergency communication experience?" "Yes, sir." 5 years of it. "And sir, with respect, every single person we're trying to evacuate tomorrow has someone back home who needs them to make it out alive. I know those communication systems better than anyone in this room, and I know what it takes to keep people calm when everything's falling apart around them." That's when I realized I didn't know my sister at all. The girl I thought I was protecting had been saving lives long before she ever put on a uniform. And what happened next would prove that sometimes the person you think needs protection is actually the one strong enough to protect everyone else. What Commander Valdez said in response changed not just the mission, but everything I thought I knew about courage, family, and what it really means to serve others. To understand why that moment in the briefing room hit me like a physical blow, you need to know what the weeks leading up to it were like at Forward Operating Base Kestrel. We'd been under constant pressure for 6 weeks straight. The Taliban had been testing our defenses almost daily, probing for weaknesses, launching mortars at random hours just to keep us on edge. Our supply convoys were getting hit regularly, which meant we were running low on everything from ammunition to medical supplies to decent food. But the worst part wasn't the attacks or the shortages. It was watching my sister struggle to find her place in this hell. Delaney had enlisted 8 months after I'd started my second tour, completely against our parents' wishes. Mom had called me crying, begging me to talk Delaney out of it. "She's not like you, Maya," Mom had said. "She's sensitive. She paints flowers, not people." What Mom didn't understand, and what I was only beginning to realize, was that Delaney hadn't joined the army to follow in my footsteps. She'd joined to prove something to herself. and maybe to all of us back home who saw her as the fragile artist who needed protection. For 3 months, I'd watched her get assigned to the most mundane tasks on base. Kitchen duty, supply inventory, cleaning weapons. The other soldiers weren't mean to her, but they weren't exactly including her either. She was Chen's little sister, the private who got special treatment because her family was military. It was driving her crazy, and honestly, it was driving me crazy too. The night before that briefing, we'd had our worst fight since she'd arrived. She'd found out I'd spoken to Sergeant Morrison about keeping her off patrol rotations. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone here, Dell," I'd told her. "Just stay safe and do your job." Her response had been quiet but firm. "Maybe that's enough for you, but it's not enough for me." I thought she was being naive, maybe even dangerous. I couldn't see past my need to protect her to understand what she was really saying. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She was asking for the chance to show who she really was. Looking back now, I realized that fight was the first crack in my understanding of my sister, but it would take a life-or-death situation for me to see the complete picture. At 0600 hours the next morning, everything changed. Intelligence had intercepted communications about a massive coordinated attack planned for the following dawn. Not the usual mortar harassment we'd been dealing with, but a full-scale assault designed to overrun our base completely. The enemy had been studying our patterns for weeks, and they'd figured out exactly how to hit us where it would hurt most. Commander Valdez called an emergency briefing for all senior personnel. The news was worse than anyone expected. We had less than 48 hours before an estimated 200 heavily armed insurgents would attack from 3 directions simultaneously. The evacuation helicopters could only make one trip due to new intelligence about enemy surface-to-air missiles in the area. One trip meant tough choices about who gets out first. The math was brutal and simple. We had 43 people on base. The helicopters could safely evacuate 38 in a single run, accounting for wounded personnel who'd need extra space for medical equipment. That left 5 people who'd have to stay behind and hold the base long enough for the helicopters to get everyone else out safely. But there was one critical problem that made this more than just a standard rearguard action. Our communication array that guided helicopters through the surrounding mountains was located in an exposed tower 200 meters from the main compound. Without someone manually operating that system, the helicopters would be flying blind through enemy territory with 0 chance of successful extraction. "I need a volunteer to stay behind and operate the communications equipment," Commander Valdez announced to the room full of seasoned soldiers. "I won't lie to you. Whoever takes this assignment will be completely exposed to enemy fire, and when the base is overrun, there's no guarantee of rescue." The silence that followed was deafening. These weren't cowards. These were battle-tested veterans who'd survived multiple deployments. But they also understood military math. Someone staying behind to operate that communication system was essentially volunteering to die, so everyone else could live. I looked around the room at faces I'd served with for months. Sergeant Martinez, who had 2 kids back in Texas. Corporal Williams, who was getting married next month. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, whose wife was expecting their first baby. Then I heard 3 words that changed everything. "I volunteer, sir." Every head in that room turned toward the back corner where Delaney stood. She wasn't supposed to even be in this briefing. Junior enlisted personnel weren't typically included in tactical discussions about evacuation procedures. But somehow, my quiet little sister had positioned herself where she could hear every word about the impossible mission that needed a volunteer. Commander Valdez's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, irritation, and then something that looked almost like anger. "Private Chen, you have been at this forward operating base for exactly 3 months. This mission requires extensive technical knowledge and combat experience that you simply do not possess. Sir, with respect, I worked as a radio communications specialist for the Oregon Forest Service for 5 years before I enlisted." Delaney's voice was steady, professional, and completely confident. "I coordinated emergency helicopter rescues in mountain terrain, more challenging than what we're facing here. I've guided aircraft through 0 visibility conditions and talked rescue teams through complex extractions when people's lives depended on my ability to stay calm under pressure." The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning unit cycling on. This was information that nobody knew about Delaney, not even me. I'd spent 6 months thinking my sister was just a dreamy artist who'd gotten swept up in some misguided sense of patriotic duty. Commander Valdez studied her for a long moment. "You're telling me you have professional emergency communication experience?" "Yes, sir. 5 years of it. I've handled situations where one wrong word or missed transmission meant people died in the wilderness. I know the ANPRC 150 radio systems we use here better than I know my own phone number." That's when everything clicked for me. The confidence in her voice, the technical terminology she was using, the way she'd been quietly observing our communication procedures for 3 months without saying a word. Delaney hadn't been struggling to fit in because she was weak or unprepared. She'd been holding back because she was overqualified and nobody had bothered to ask about her background. "Prove it," Commander Valdez said simply. "Walk me through a complex extraction scenario using our current equipment setup." What happened next was like watching my sister transform into someone I'd never met. Commander Valdez pulled out a tactical map and pointed to a complex mountain extraction scenario. 3 helicopters, heavy enemy fire, 0 visibility conditions, multiple landing zones. "Walk me through it." Delaney stepped forward without hesitation. "First, I'd establish primary and alternate frequencies for each aircraft. The lead helicopter gets channel 1, backup gets channel 3, medical evacuation gets channel 7. I'd set up relay communications every 30 seconds to maintain contact through the mountain. Interference. She traced flight paths on the map with her finger like she'd done this 1,000 times. "The current communication array setup has a fatal flaw," she continued, and I watched Commander Valdez's eyebrows raise. "The antenna positioning creates a dead zone between grid coordinates 847 and 851. If the helicopters approach from the northeast like we planned, they'll lose contact for approximately 4 minutes. That's enough time for enemy fire to take them down before they even reach the landing zone." She wasn't just answering his test question. She was identifying problems with our actual evacuation plan that none of us had noticed. "I'd need to relocate the secondary antenna array 50 meters east and adjust the frequency modulation to compensate for the mountain echo effects. That gives us continuous communication coverage throughout the entire flight path." Delaney pulled out a small notebook and started sketching antenna configurations that looked more advanced than anything our regular communication specialist had drawn. Commander Valdez stared at the notebook, then at Delaney, then back at the notebook. "Where did you learn to do frequency calculations like this?" "Forest Service rescue operations in the Cascade Mountains, sir. We had to maintain contact with helicopters flying through terrain that makes this place look like a parking lot." The room was dead silent. Every soldier in there understood what had just happened. The quiet private we'd all dismissed as inexperienced had just solved a potentially fatal flaw in our evacuation plan. "Private Chen," Commander Valdez said quietly, "you have the mission." The next 18 hours were the longest of my life. We implemented every single one of Delaney's modifications to the communication system. She worked alongside our senior radio operators like she'd been doing this for years, which I realized she had. She relocated antenna arrays, recalibrated frequency settings, and established backup protocols that none of us had even considered. When the helicopters arrived under heavy enemy fire, I was on the first evacuation flight with the wounded. From my position in the aircraft, I could see Delaney in that exposed communication tower, calmly coordinating the most complex rescue operation any of us had ever witnessed. Her voice over the radio was steady, professional, completely in control. "Sparrow 1. Adjust heading 15 degrees northwest to avoid the dead zone. Sparrow 2. Hold position for 30 seconds while medical transport clears the landing zone. All aircraft maintain radio contact every 15 seconds until extraction is complete." She guided all 3 helicopters through enemy territory with 0 casualties. Not one aircraft was hit. Not one soldier was left behind. The operation that military analysts later called statistically impossible succeeded because my little sister knew exactly what she was doing. 6 weeks later, Delaney received a Bronze Star for her actions. But more importantly, she earned something that medals can't provide: the complete respect of every soldier in our unit. Commander Valdez recommended her for advanced communications training, and she's now one of the Army's youngest communication specialists. The biggest change, though, was in our relationship. I finally understood that my need to protect Delaney had been holding both of us back. She didn't need my protection. She needed my trust and recognition for who she really was. A few months later, I asked her why she'd never told anyone about her Forest Service background. Her answer changed how I see courage forever. You all saw what you expected to see. Sometimes you have to let people discover who you really are when it matters most. If this story taught you something about seeing people's hidden strengths, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more real military stories that will change how you think about courage and family. Sometimes the people we think we need to protect are actually strong enough to protect us all.